And welcome, everybody. It's been a while since I've been here live with you, but I'm glad to be back with this very, very special edition of Respect. As many of you might remember, there was an alleged, my favorite word in the world, an alleged assassination attempt thwarted back in California in 2024 against President Trump by a quote unquote crazed man with bringing guns to the rally. And as you know from my past, you really can't tend to believe a lot of what comes out in the media. And there are two sides to every story. And a lot of the times people don't bother to do retractions. People don't bother to investigate to get the whole story. And today, that's kind of what we're bringing you in this special report. VEM MILLER was the man who was accused of going to the rally with loaded guns in the possible attempt to take out, at that point in time, candidate Trump in California, in Coachella, California. And a lot has come out about that since that time. In addition, you now have Sheriff Chad Bianco, who was the sheriff of Riverside County at the time where this all went down, running for governor of the state of California. And a lot has come out about that. So I have two guests with me today, both VEM MILLER and retired Captain Michael Lujan, to talk about the situation and exactly things that have transpired and things we may not know about those situations in the Riverside County Sheriff's Department and its leadership, which is now gubernatorial candidate Chad Bianco. So I'd like to welcome my two guests, VEM MILLER and Captain Michael Lujan. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us, Mark.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is a very, very intricate and interesting story. So, let's start with you, Vem. This is a crazy situation. And if you have to look at it from a logical standpoint, and you have to look at it from the point of view of even a prosecuting attorney, you are from what I understand, you are a Republican conservative. You're a Trump supporter. You're going to attend a rally that presidential candidate's going to be at, and you admittedly have two loaded weapons in the back of your car.
Not loaded, but that's okay. I want to clarify that. Yeah.
Okay, so you had two weapons in the back of your car. Admittedly so, not the smartest move, especially in the state of California, which kind of leans in the other direction overall. Maybe not in Riverside County, but overall kind of leans in the other direction. And everything ensued from there, and not in a good way. So why don't you fill us in as to what transpired that day, what led you to go and do this in that manner, and then what happened after that?
So there's a lot of misconceptions in terms of the geography of that rally, how it was set up, because frankly, Chad Bianco has been lying about it. There was never any, this notion of I was trying to enter a Trump rally with firearms is completely false, because the ticket itself stated that the way the rally worked, and this is something I know because at that point I had been to 24 Trump rallies. I had spoken to Secret Service agents, and the rally and the parking lot are never in the same location because of a bomber type of situation. So they don't want somebody driving in their car filled with a bunch of bombs and then trying to assassinate a political candidate in that manner. So I'm armed with that kind of information. Probably a bad use saying armed, but I have that information because of my experience going to Trump rallies, of having VIP access and multiple times being within inches of President Trump, because as a 2022 Republican candidate in Nevada, I had special access, and this is what this situation was. So when I asked my buddy who ran the Las Vegas Clark County Republican Party for tickets, he arranged it where I only wanted one, but I ended up getting 4 of them in my email box. The tickets clearly state that you will be parking at a off-site location. And then you have to get out of your car and take a shuttle to the Trump rally. Kind of like when you go to Disneyland, you park your car, you get in the shuttle. It's not like you're dropped off at the entrance of Disneyland. So knowing this information, there was never this concept of entering a Trump rally with guns, because the parking lot and the actual rally were separated by a 1.2-mile perimeter. So that didn't even cross my mind, right? What's important to note is what I was doing beforehand and why I had even taken my lawful Nevada firearms with me, because I moved to Nevada in 2020 because of the COVID situation. In September of 2020, I moved because, frankly, living in LA became unbearable. I was raised in LA. I've been in LA since the late 80s, so I'm very much a California kid. But once the COVID situation happened, I moved away. In this instance, and also I'm an investigative journalist, I've done a lot of exposés on corrupt officials. We really specialize in removing people out of their office, like judges, lawyers that have lost their bar license because we've made, content that exposes them that has then gone viral. So we have, quite a number of individuals that are no longer in their positions to cause harm that have been doing bad things, including 4 judges, right? And so on October 5th, I get a tip by a friend of mine concerning the trafficking of ballots in California stemming from Tacoma, Washington. And I actually have a piece on my America Happens website, as well as my X account at not VEM Miller. All you got to do is search Motherlode, California, and it shows all the receipts to that event, including the testimonial of 2 whistleblowers. So I get contacted, and my immediate concern, having seen what went down in 2020, is that there might be some, tomfoolery with this election as well. So when I get a call by 2 truck drivers over the course of October 5th to October 8th, both which are documented, and both which have been shared with individuals like Patrick Byrne, who's invested his own money in uncovering election fraud. I learned that from Tacoma, Washington, they're trucking 150 semi-trucks and trailers all through California, New Mexico, Colorado, and Arizona. And these seem like 2 legitimate whistleblowers. They're telling me things like, we're seeing pallets of ballots being loaded. They're crossing state lines. They're chaperoning us. We can't even pull over to take a piss at any truck stop. We have to stop at particular truck stops with these security individuals chaperoning us. And they're seeing ballots. The big thing is it's crossing state lines. So there's something weird going on there. I immediately share this information with Patrick Byrne and his investigation team. They actually go and meet one of the whistleblowers during this course of time. They talk with them, and they find out that the owners of this company there's conspicuous things with them. Like, one of them's been charged with 3 counts of aggravated rape, done no time. The other person was convicted of financial fraud, done no time, right? And 3 of the individuals behind the scenes with Patrick Byrne are actually former spooks, I guess you could say, like old school spooks. And they're like, look, this has a hallmark of people that are on the hook and doing bad things for bad people. So based upon that information, I say I'm going to go check out one of the truck stops, which is in Lubec, California. And that's also documented on video. And my purpose of being there was, this is one of the locations where these trucks are supposed to be congregating. I'm going to go there like an investigative journalist and take pictures of DOT numbers and that sort of thing, which is also documented, as are the bills of lading that I collected during that time. And so I leave my residence in Nevada to drive to California on October 8th. Evening of October 8th, I attend, and this is where the story gets weird, because I attend the James O'Keefe premiere for the movie Line in the Sand. And I'm invited, as is Chad Bianco, and I have no idea who Chad Bianco is at this time, but apparently we're standing just feet apart because a friend of mine, Nicole, took a picture of me, and then she said, okay, I turn about 90 degrees and took a picture of Chad Bianco. So we both happen to be friends with James O'Keefe, and the reason why we're both invited, right? That evening, which is now the morning of October 9th, I travel to Lubec, California. I do exactly what I'm saying, taking pictures of DOT numbers. And this is one particular trucking company. So I know the name of the trucking company. I recognize some of their trucks parked there, and I document the entire thing. The morning of October 9, I wake up, 4 or 5 hours later in my room. Around 10:30, I contact Jesse Law of the Clark County Republican Party. And by the way, Jesse Law and Patrick Byrne have both written articles about these events, verifying exactly what I'm telling you. So they came to my rescue because they realized this is a whole bunch of nonsense, right? So I get the tickets. On the ticket, it clearly says that you have to hop in a shuttle once you park, right? So I have the two firearms. And by the way, Mark, what's also important is these firearms is one is a handgun, Glock 19. The other one is a shotgun, right? These are not assassination weapons on their surface. And had anybody done any testing on these guns, they would have seen these guns were not even fired, because I bought these guns in Nevada once I started getting death threats mailed to my house because of the investigative journalism I do. And I'm not really a gun guy. At this point, I hadn't even fired these guns, but I just had them in the back of my truck in case while I'm at this truck stop, which for anybody that's been at a truck stop, any car, and I had a SUV, a brand new SUV, the trucks dwarf your car. And if you're amongst 500 trucks, you really stand out like a sore thumb. So I was thinking, okay, if these guys catch me, I'm attacked, might as well have my firearms, and just in case, right? So I drive to the Coachella Trump rally. Now we're at October 12th. I arrive close to the parking lot, so I'm not even in the parking lot. I don't even attempt to park. I'm 20 yards away from the parking lot entrance. In Nevada, it's been a pattern and practice of mine. Whenever I go to a Trump rally and I'm about to park my car, if I do have my firearms, which in Nevada, it's not what it is in California, I've learned, the police basically practically give you a high five. They get excited when you tell them, hey, I got a couple of firearms, just parking my car here, letting you know it's in the car. And I do that sort of thing just in case somebody breaks into my car and they're aware that there's firearms in the back of my car, right? So I do the exact same thing. I even offer, and this is all recorded, by the way, because as an investigative journalist, I've just kind of like on a gut feeling, I record things whenever, especially when I have interactions with police officers and that sort of thing. So anyway, I get my handheld recorder, I put it in the middle console as I approach the deputy. And it's very clear from the audio that I'm the one approaching. I'm the one calling the guy over. You hear his audio, get closer to the car. And by the way, this has been analyzed by many constitutional sheriffs, because I've been friends for years with the Constitutional Sheriffs Association founders, as well as some of the key individuals on the board, right? So they've listened to this audio and said, it's very clear, you're the one that waved them in. They didn't stop you. All that stuff is nonsense, right? Because that's what later Chad Bianco claimed, is that my car was in disarray. One of the deputies spotted it, and then they instigated a search, which is not the way things went down. Essentially, everything, as I'll get to it, was a lie to make it seem like this was a heroic sheriff's department. So anyway, I tell the deputy, hey, I got a couple of firearms. I'm a Nevada Republican Party member, caucus captain, thinking that the logical thing for them to do is Google search me, see that I ran for office, I'm very involved. Worst case scenario, you call the Clark County Republican Party to find out who I am, what my credentials are, and that sort of thing. And I tell them all this stuff, and I even say, you guys are welcome to hold on to my firearms, right? That deputy tells me to pull over. Another deputy comes. I repeat the same information, that I have a couple of firearms. This dude just told me to pull over. And then next thing I know, in about a couple of minutes after that, I'm being told to get out of my car. The deputy is putting me in handcuffs because he says for his own safety and protection. And mind you, the guns weren't in arm's reach. I mean, I'd have to have like Fantastic Four, Mr. Stretch Guy arms to be able to reach to them, right? They put me, and then, they put me in handcuffs. They throw me in a boiling hot cruiser, which I was pre-diabetic at the time, and I kept asking them for my supplements to deal with that problem. They didn't do that. The outside was 110 degrees. Inside that cruiser was probably 130, 140. A few times I lost consciousness in there because I was there for what seemed like at least an hour, if not more. Then they eventually give me some water. And at this point, they take me to the station. FBI and Secret Service comes there. They decline to interview me. They don't give me my phone call. I'm thrown into a jail cell around 8:30 p.m. I'm released at 1:30 in the morning. I find myself a motel at that point because, everything was booked up, and I found what I call the sperm motel because they were shooting a porno next door, which was very clear. And this is, you can imagine I'm sitting on my, on the bed with the headrest behind me, and next door there's like just all kinds of noises, pornographic noises happening, And then at this point, I get a couple of hours sleep. I wake up in the morning, and because I've been a 30-year Hollywood professional. I've traveled a lot of the same avenues that you've traveled, Mark. I've worked with, nearly all the media companies. I started as a music video director, directing videos for people like DMX, Master P, John Mayer. I did about 100 music videos. Then I transitioned to creating and selling TV shows, which I did for networks like A&E, History, Discovery. I worked in a lot of news departments. I pretty much understand the PR game, is the point that I'm trying to make. So I'm eating my taco at the taco place next door to my motel, and these reports start coming out that they caught like some assassin guy, right? And knowing how the drip thing works with PR, it becomes very clear to me that they are setting me up. They're talking about me, even when the first articles did not mention me by name. Within an hour or so, they start mentioning my name. And the way they start mentioning my name, which was very clear that something shady was going on here, is the entire mainstream media, I think something like 300 outlets worldwide, have my name, have every single picture of me. They have fat VEM, skinny VEM, VEM without glasses, VEM with glasses, right? And I know the pattern and practice of what's happened before. The two real assassins, they were saying, it was popping sounds, and they didn't have a lot of information. But for me, it was very clear that there was a PR company behind that. And this is obviously the sheriff's department, their PR branch. And the way they come out with it, where they have all my information, videos, everything, I'm like, okay, this is really shady, right? This is obviously they're trying to set me up here. And my mind starts going into, Lee Harvey Oswald land, where the next thing they're going to do is they're going to try to kill me. This is actually my fear at that time because of how hard they were coming after me. So I go back into my motel room. I immediately record a rebuttal video where I state the facts. And remember, my handheld recorder is not in my possession at this time because it's in the car that they impounded, right? I record this video. I try my best to upload it from the motel, but the internet's too weak. So then I get inside I call a driver. And basically, I go into hiding at that point. I go into hiding at a safe location, somewhere where they can't find me. And the next day, and this is the part where, my fears of like they were actually trying to off me, I think were somehow realized because my parents live in Nevada. And because of these death threats that I've had before due to the investigative journalism way prior to these events, I use their house for getting my mail sent. So the only house on record is my parents' house. Well, lo and behold, 5 p.m. on the 14th now, a battalion of police officers show up to my parents' home, right? They try to get inside without a warrant. They invade their property. My parents parents are inside, obviously very scared. I mean, they're 83 years old and 78 years old. I think 81 and 76, 77 at the time. And so these guys are trying to come into the house, and I've gotten the body cams. That's also available on a piece called Geriatric Terrorism, which you could find on America Happens. You could also find it by searching on Not VEM MILLER. So these guys come there, and this is, again, way after the Secret Service and FBI have released information saying Donald Trump was in no danger. They've refused to interview me at this point. They weren't even no questioning whatsoever. And another thing that was a lie was that I was released on $5,000 bail, which also came out of the sheriff's department, and there was no bail. They literally handed me a ticket that says I'm being cited for unlawful firearms, which also, by the way, since then there's been Supreme Court challenges where all those nonsensical laws in California are not even legal laws according to the Constitution, right? So anyway, my parents' home gets invaded. These police officers, or property, I should say, these police officers are armed with false information. And this is now, we're talking like 36 hours after the FBI Secret Service refused to interview me, probably 30 hours after they released a statement that President Trump was in no danger, right? And these guys amongst themselves, it's funny because there's multiple officers. Most of them are saying this is a nothing burger, but there's two specific officers, and people wonder why things, go, get out of control, is because these two police officers, you could hear them clearly putting false information into the heads of others. So imagine the police officer, most of them are like, look, this is a nothing burger. The guy was released, doesn't seem like an assassin, doesn't seem like a threat, right? But these two guys are saying that, oh, he killed his parents and their bodies are rotting inside the house, and then he went to kill Trump. So they're trying to get the other guys excited, and you could imagine in that kind of a scenario, these are the stories that you hear. Well, he was trying to reach for a water bottle. We thought it was a gun. We shot him dead had I been there. But because I'm an investigative journalist, because I've had death threats before, I was at least, ahead of the game enough to be like, I need to be in hiding as far away from my parents' house as possible, because that's an obvious location, Sorry, go ahead.
The officers who were at your parents' house, were they from the Riverside County Sheriff's Office? Were they
No, Las Vegas Metro.
Las Vegas Metro. Okay.
Anti-terrorism unit.
And the information that they received, not the information that the other officer was spewing to rile up the others there, but the information they received from.
This is the part that we're still trying to figure out, because they keep trying to cover it up. It's obvious it came from Riverside somehow, because that's where the lie originated. But we've had a very difficult time in getting records, any records, by the way. 16 months later, they still haven't released the body cameras from the initial incident at the rally. And the reason I firmly believe is because we filed a lawsuit. That lawsuit has federal counts and state counts. State counts would be things like defamation, slander, tortious conduct. The federal counts include civil rights violations. And what I attest until today, and I said the first day in that video that I made 1 hour after being called an assassin, probably not even like half an hour after being called an assassin, is that this situation started with multiple civil rights and constitutional violations. So they refuse to release the body cameras. They say it's an ongoing investigation because that ticket they gave me, which, by the way, they changed those charges too, because they realized the first two misdemeanors they gave me are not going to fly. And now we're finding out that the stuff they changed it to, they're saying carrying a loaded firearm in public, which in California could be stretched to mean in the back of your trunk, right? They've realized, and we're about to go into court, all judges have indicated that the DA has no case. This is nonsense. This is a waste of the court's time. This is stuff that's going to get dismissed ultimately. Now, so, they invade my parents' home, traumatize the crap out of them. And then for 16 months until today, Chad Bianco keeps posting on his account, keeps attacking me, saying that I was entering or trying to enter a Trump rally with guns when the geography of that day, the tickets from that day show that what he's saying is clearly impossible. And what I do believe firmly is that this was Chad Bianco's unofficial run for governor. This was a way to get on the media, and I won't speak too much to that topic because Mr. Michael Lujan has actually worked with Chad Bianco, has seen how he panders to the media, how he does this sort of thing. This is not an unusual thing he did, but I think, you know, because he's done it so much and gotten away with it, look, out of 50,000 people, he ran into the one guy that knows at least how to challenge his tremendous power, his lies. I mean, I've released over 300 pieces of information and content over the last 16 months, including interviews with whistleblowers within his department for things like, you know, an array of things, you know, where it's like overbilling for bathrooms that cost $100,000, but charging them at $800,000. Doors that cost $3,000, charging them at $50,000. The OnlyFans making sergeant within his department that, you know, literally makes OnlyFans porn on the side, but he refuses to hold accountable, even though he claims to be this Christian constitutionalist sheriff, you know, a lot of things. And, you know, we're going to go through all those kind of bad behavior type things, abuse of power. But, you know, that's been my story where, and my social is getting basically quashed, you know, what we found out. So 4 days ago, Stu Peters released some code on X where you pop in your handle and you find out how your account is being throttled, to what degree, and what are the labels placed within your account. So lo and behold, the minute Sheriff Chad Bianco on February 17 of 2025 decides to run for sheriff and makes the announcement, subsequent to that, and I have charts where you see my socials, you know, going through nice peaks and valleys, and then it flatlines. And what we found out is that he is using his campaign and or sheriff powers to put essentially terrorist labels on my account, because I'm the one guy that constantly keeps releasing information as to why he's a really bad player. And so, you know, it's clear, you know, what the audit says, you know, there's, I guess, a lot of labels because I keep going after Chad Bianco and saying truth about him. So he made sure to use his power to completely mute my voice in order for this information not to get out. But nonetheless, we've still been successful in getting it out. Like him lying about BLM kneeling for 3 years and yelling at people that would challenge it, even though there's video of him doing that sort of thing, you know, as being one example. I mean, the BLM kneeling certainly has been the one that's been most damaging for him, because he would literally shout at people when they suggested that he was BLM kneeling. But, you know, this tells you the kind of character we're talking about, you know, in terms of Chad Bianco.
Well, one of the things, you know, based on what you've relayed so far, that strikes me, because Lord knows I've spent enough time dealing with the courts and dealing with the police and dealing with things like that, and people being charged, falsely charged, the way the media puts it out there and has seemed to have learned the definition of the word retraction. If any of what was said about you is true, if your ass would be rotting in a cell awaiting trial.
Yeah.
You would not be walking around being assailed, basically.
Yeah.
So something initially doesn't ring right there. Whether it directly is attributable to Sheriff Bianco or not kind of remains to be seen. Now, I know that it wasn't long after that situation that the president at another rally, or a presidential candidate at that point in time, at another rally, called Sheriff Bianco out. And I think that was more of a kickoff to his gubernatorial run, because now you've got the endorsement of the president. He's, you know, as he likes to say, from central casting. But these are different things that are tending to lean itself toward a pattern. Now, Captain Lujan, Mike.
Yes, sir.
You spent 31 years in that department. working with Sheriff Bianco. And you retired prior to this situation.
Correct.
But you have a very, very interesting background with that department, having risen through the ranks there, having gone through multiple different scenarios there. Tell us a little bit about your history and how it relates, and could shine a little bit of light on here in regard to the possibility of Sheriff Bianco being culpable in this.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity. First of all, I retired as a captain in December of 2020 after 31 years with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. In a nutshell, I worked a variety of assignments within the Corrections Bureau, with field operations with the patrol, and I spent almost 10 years in the Sheriff's Central Homicide Unit. Now, 10 years in the Sheriff's Central Homicide Unit, I was involved in about 248 cases, so I have a little experience on how investigations are done. Not a lot of experience, but a little experience. I worked for 5 sheriffs over those 31 years, and I can tell you, based on my training, my experience over those 31 years, Chad Bianco is the most dishonest of those 5 sheriffs in my that I have experienced. Okay, and some of the things I learned when I was a captain. I was a captain in 2019 and 2020, and I left for a variety of reasons. One of the things came up when we look at from internally, there was a disciplinary matrix, right? So when a deputy erred in judgment or in conduct, there was a certain amount of discipline that individual would receive. For example, if you were arrested for DUI, you're off duty, you're arrested for DUI, that disciplinary matrix, your first offense, you're probably looking at 40 hours suspension. And then after that, you're probably going to get terminated, right? One thing I remember vividly in a commander's meeting, the effort to work with the Riverside Sheriff's Association and the Law Enforcement Management Union to eliminate the disciplinary matrix, right? Because at the time, Bianco said he is the only person that can disseminate discipline fairly and objectively. No one else can do that. And that equates to his mindset that, my badge is the only badge that matters. As a captain, my badge did not matter, right? My uniform did not matter. To me, it was the department as a whole that mattered. As a captain, my responsibility was to make sure our deputies were properly trained. They had the resources to do their job effectively and appropriately under the Constitution and serve the community that, I oversaw as a captain. And we did it together. When we left the station, I always had a philosophy. When you leave the station, we're one team with one mission, serve the community in a fair, objective manner. With that being said, and it started early. VEM's not the first victim of this. And I'll give you an example because, Chad has always said that, he has the integrity and the honesty. He's the most, of all the candidates. Well, integrity. So if we look at integrity, you're doing the right thing when no one's looking, right? Honesty is you're just speaking the truth, okay? And you need to pass that down to your subordinates because you're, using his words, his badge is the only one that matters. So the 4,100 sworn and non-sworn employees of the Sheriff's Department are all working for his badge and his uniform. They represent the department he's responsible for. So back in March of 2020, and this is why I wasn't overly surprised about the press conference after I thought about it, right? In 2020, there was a gentleman named Deputy Nicholas Jones. He's no longer with the department. He investigated a tow scheme out of the Temecula station. Real quickly, he went to the grand jury. They went to the grand jury. And one of the things that piqued me was he testified that there were signed service tow agreements. So the allegation was a lieutenant, a sergeant, and a deputy were towing vehicles. Well, the deputy was towing vehicles for a particular tow company out of rotation. It wasn't their turn in the lineup. And then that was so they could keep his contract, right? There was never a contract. There are signed contracts now, but during this time frame, there haven't been signed contracts since 1996. So what happens is when you see a tow company show up for a law enforcement request to tow a vehicle of a drunk driver or a person who's crashed or a person who has an unlicensed driver, they all have agreements with the law enforcement agency where they actually rotate. They get a week on, or every 2 days they rotate, whatever the system allows or they subscribe to. Well, in this particular case, a complaint was filed against Nicholas Jones that he lied, he provided false testimony, right? And Sheriff Bianco, because this was a political prosecution or political arrest, I don't, and they wrote a report and convinced the DA's office, right? And they filed it, they were successful, you know, but when I look at it, I'm like, why are we lying under false testimony? I mean, when you piecemeal this stuff and you say, listen, this was a lie. We know there are no signed agreements, right? Why wasn't the captain being held accountable? Well, if you swore, you under sworn testimony to the grand jury that there are signed agreements, these are contracts and there are none, then that's false testimony, right? You should be held accountable for that, correct? No, a complaint was filed and Chad Bianco unfounded it. And the individual, was able to get a grand jury indictment and was promoted to investigator, where he was ultimately assigned to the Central Homicide Unit, where he was involved in 60 homicide cases, which is problematic because now people who kill other people are going to let go free because, this is a Brady issue, for law enforcement, right? And this same individual, Nicholas Jones, testified in court that, there were never any signed agreements. He thoroughly investigated. So if you thoroughly investigated, there were no signed agreements. There were no signed agreements at the trial, but in grand jury testimony, you said there were, right? So, I have issues with the whole dishonesty. You need to hold your subordinates, to being honest. So that leads me into when I think back, when I have they always say hindsight is 20/20, and let me talk about VEM Miller. So here he is. I think it was on a Saturday, the rally was, and the press conference was on a Sunday, right? As an investigator, right, I'm looking at, I want to view the body worn camera footage. I want to read the report. And then I have a whole nother team that can go deep dive into VEM Miller's social media. Who is this guy? I also have individuals, they're called crime analysts. I have a whole unit of crime analysts that are going to run VEM Miller every which way, upside down, right to left. I'm going to know so much about VEM Miller, before I go step out and make a statement, right? And I want to know what evidence they have, right? What evidence did we have that has led Bianco to say that he thwarted an assassination attempt? So we're going to look at that evidence, right? Can we agree that Bianco had said there were fictitious documents, right? There were IDs or there were documents in multiple names, right? There were passports in multiple names, right? And prior to that press conference, right, you have a situation that occurred in a parking lot, the staging area for anyone who wanted to attend the rally, approximately 1.2 miles away. So now you get the Secret Service looking in. You don't think the Secret Service and FBI and their crime analysts and their people, their support staff looked into VEM Miller? The question I have is, I'm going to say yes, because they did their due diligence and they made a determination that VEM was not a threat. So we don't want to talk to them. You do what you want, Sheriff, right? Think about it. In California, when you have fraudulent fictitious document, we call that a ground ball to first base, and there's 2 outs, right? That's a simple felony, right? It's very simple. We could interview him. We could say, hey, you have these fictitious, you have these passports in 2 different names. This is a federal offense, right? So when we talk about all these, the way, and to this day, how Bianco has really distorted and was dishonest and disingenuous and lied about the truth in various forms and fashions, right? Just like when the whole BLM incident, at the end of the day, they gave VEM Miller a misdemeanor citation, right? And then how did they get to his parents' home? I would speculate, over my 31 years of service, is our member, the Riverside Sheriff Department's member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, or the Inland Regional Apprehension Team, which is an IRAT with the FBI. The joint JTTF called over to their counterparts over at JTTF or IRAT and said, hey, we got this guy. And they gave him this big elaborate story, right? Oh, we need to go check. And so they go to Mr. Miller's parents' home, but they don't say who called or what prompted their visit. They say basically it's a check the welfare. Well, why? Who, there was no reason for them to go over there. They're in another city, in another state. The only reason in my experience is, hey, contact our deputy on JTTF, have them contact the JTTF at whatever region. And we need to do a welfare check, or we need to do a safety check, or whatever they call it in Nevada, but we need to go over to this house and see if we can get in there, right? Because they don't have enough for exigent circumstances. They don't have enough to do a search warrant, right? So they're going to try to bamboozle their way into it, saying it's a welfare check, in my experience, right? I also want to elaborate on the fact that if Mr. Miller was so much of a threat, right, you would have charged him with something other than the misdemeanor, and then you also would have did a bail enhancement. He would still be in jail, but you didn't have the evidence, and you knew, and you went up on that podium, and you basically lied to the world, right?
Well, let's just take a quick step back here,
okay.
where you brought up the documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Was there any physical documentation that there were, multiple passports or documents in different names and this and that and the other?
So I have.
That's a question for Bianco. If there were, why weren't they taken into custody, booked in as evidence, and filed the appropriate charge? We don't see that. I'm basing my analysis is based on the fact that he was only charged with possession of a loaded firearm and expired registration, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the point I'm getting at is if you're talking about that, if you're talking about the fact that VEM Miller shows up, he's got 2 weapons in the back of his truck. He's got different IDs. Now, we're not talking about your bus pass or your ID to get into your HOA or this or that. We're talking about either passports or driver's licenses, documentation from a governmental organization, which in and of itself is possession of forged documents, which is a criminal violation.
You would make that determination and then investigate it.
But it would be reason enough to be able to hold a suspect, correct?
Correct. Well, not necessarily, because keep in mind, based on the fact pattern that Bianco has laid out from day one, was the fact that VEM Miller showed up and made a statement that he was here to kill the president, right? Or a candidate for president or former president, right? That statement, coupled with all these, you could string those together and write an application for a bail enhancement and charge him with a more serious crime. You could charge him when he said, "I'm here to kill the president," right? You could charge him with making criminal threats, and that's a felony, right? You can also, from that felony, you can look for additional information. One, you could do what's called a Cal EPCA, a search warrant for his phone, which they had, right? Any media devices that they had in the vehicle. But you didn't see that because, one, they knew on Saturday that VEM Miller never made that statement, "I'm here to kill the president." And I don't know what the quote was. I'm just paraphrasing, I guess, best of my recollection, because that occurred on the following Sunday, right? Later on, Chad says, "Oh, I got bad information." Well, that's a very specific statement. He made a very specific statement. Someone in the department made a very specific statement, right? Quote, a statement they attributed to VEM Miller. So why wasn't that individual appropriately admonished or disciplined for providing false and misleading information up the chain of command or directly to Bianco? Bianco has a habit of going directly to the employee or the subordinate, bypassing the chain of command to get firsthand information, right? So all these come into account, all those questions, these are the questions that I have as an investigator. And you could say, yes, my mistake I apologize. The information I relayed on that fateful Sunday was in error, right? You could have said that. You could have, as I think we talked, retracted your statement and corrected it. But here we are. We're going on what, 2-3 years of, and I gotta hand it to Chad, because once he starts lying, he sticks to the lie. He sticks to his story, right? He's sticking to it, right? Without any evidence whatsoever. But hey, listen to me. I have the most integrity. I'm the sheriff of Riverside County, and I'm the most honest, right?
Well, okay, but let's view that, okay?
Okay.
Because what we're discussing here is a pattern of lying, which, technically, if you want to use those terms, this is fraud. These fraudulent statements, this misrepresentation to the public by a public official. Because as sheriff, you're not an appointee like a police captain or anything like that. You are an elected official. Your deputies work for you. They fall under the same category. Allegedly, your job, you're the highest official really in the county. You're supposed to be there to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of California. Nothing more, nothing less. And what you both seem to be stating is that as you get into this, the lack of integrity is basically what it boils down to, because let's say for argument's sake, you innocently received false information. You didn't, cross your T's and dot your I's. You didn't check further. You got one piece of information and ran with it. It's kind of like what we used to say in the industry in regard to the local Fox station. Better to be first than right, and you go and you get the information, you put it out there. And now you find out something different. And rather than retracting, apologizing, calling off the dogs, you're going to dig that hole. You're going to die on that hill. And you're going to stick with that story. So now, is this a pattern of behavior? I know how you would feel about it, VEM, but as a retired captain from that department, is this a pattern of behavior that seems consistent with the sheriff?
Yeah, and you see it. You see the pattern emerge really with our in custody deaths, right? You see the pattern of, like, for example, there was one individual who repeatedly tried to kill himself, excuse me, in custody by swallowing foreign objects. Well, in one instance, he actually succeeded, and they ruled that death as an accident as opposed to a suicide. Well, how do you accidentally swallow all these foreign objects that you get your access to? So when you look at the in custody deaths, like we had an individual, a correctional deputy that was hired. I think it was a correctional deputy, but he was also caught with, a couple years later, he was caught with 500,000 plus fentanyl tablets, right? This individual was assigned to the Corrections Bureau and their transportation unit. So the transportation unit goes from jail to jail to jail. So you see this rise of overdoses, fentanyl overdoses. And Chad Bianco, one of his, when he's interviewed, some of these interviewed statements were very disturbing. He was like, well, they shouldn't have came to jail, or, well, they know better than to use drugs, right? But when the deputy was arrested, they almost immediately said it's not connected to any of the jail deaths, right? So I was given a call by a reporter, and asked for my comment on it. And I said, listen, there is no way that they can absolutely say that all these overdoses within all the correctional facilities were not related. They can't exonerate that individual. He had access to every jail. And guess what? After the individual was arrested, there was one overdose. And it was the following month in 2023, if I remember right. In 2024, there were 7 in custody deaths, but we don't have all the information on that because it's not being released. And I would take note, I think it's Gray versus County of Riverside. The attorneys are from the prison law office. They actually filed a lawsuit against, all the pretty much corrections statewide, and were very victorious. They actually came into corrections, and they might still, I think they're still there, providing oversight of just the Corrections Bureau, making policy changes, recommendations. They've increased mental health and what they call behavioral health and medical and corrections, where the in-custody deaths have really started to downslide because of this internal oversight by the attorneys from the prison law office. My sources in the department, they claim that all the corrections being made aren't because of the sheriff, although he took credit for it, is because of when they analyze the conduct and the policy and procedures, they make changes and they correct them, both on the sheriff's department side, behavioral health side, and then medical side. But we're not allowed to get those reports because the county had went to court and requested that all those reports, and I can't remember what the legal term is, but they're all basically, there's a court order to conceal them, to prevent them from being publicly disseminated. So, but Bianco was first to go on scene and say this was all me, when internally, if you have people in the department, know that oversight does work, it does benefit, right? So in this particular case, it was basically another misrepresentation of the facts, when there's no evidence that, you can provide that this deputy was not providing fentanyl tablets to inmates throughout the Corrections Bureau and all 5 facilities. So, and they did that within a couple of days. And they did that so much, I got a call from another captain asking me not to comment on the matter. And, I'm like, I've been retired. If people call me, I'm going to tell them the truth. And then this has been, after the article came out, then they started to investigate on whether or not they could exonerate this deputy from providing fentanyl tablets. We know they introduced them or evidence to exonerate him from introducing the fentanyl tablets. But what we do know without question is the overdoses have dropped dramatically. And that would lead me to believe that this deputy was more than likely. And at the same time, I think they arrested 3 deputies for there was a deputy who was doing cocaine or methamphetamine in the parking lot of the Coysburg Detention Center. And then ultimately they found it in his locker. I think there was a correctional deputy at the Larry D. Smith Correctional Facility they caught using narcotics. The checks and balance and the supervision is more, in my opinion, is more likes than actual. I need more clicks. I need more likes on social media than actually doing your job, quite frankly. And this is all comes down from the top. And I was part of that for 2 years, where me and a couple other commanders at the commanders meeting would say, hey, we need to reinforce the standards of our deputies, but I hope I answered your question, but there are more instances,
Well, absolutely, because one of the things, we've got some clips here, and when you've assumed the role of saying, like Truman, the buck stops here, okay, and you've assumed that role that you're in charge and your badge is the only badge that matters, and you're accepting that responsibility, then by the same token, you're kind of accepting the responsibility of everybody below you and the manner in which they carry out their duties.
Correct.
And no matter how you look at it, I say this about politicians all the time, that when you boil down a politician, which is always a great start, where are they? They are public servants. And it's no different for police officers or sheriff's deputies. Now, we have a clip here of an instance that we went over. I want to show this and another clip. We'll start with this one. Where the guy sucker punches a deputy. He was drunk, this and that and the other. And next thing you know, you've got Rodney King going on. And, some of the other deputies come in and kind of try to break it up, but some of these guys just don't stop.
Correct. When I look at this video, I look at it from the analysis of, the requirement of reasonable and necessary force. So you have to use reasonable and necessary force to overcome the force that is being placed upon you, right? So in this particular instance, when this particular inmate who was being booked into the county jail for public intoxication, his normal stay is going to be anywhere between 4 to 6 hours, where he's evaluated by medical and then released, right? He's okay. Okay. This, the taking him to the floor, he's uncuffed. They can take him to the floor. That's fine. But at some point in time, your defensive mechanism of trying to overcome the resistance has now transferred into an offensive posture. So what I see here is I see a guy who is face down on the floor. I see multiple punches to the head and the back. I see multiple we're looking up to 9 deputies on this individual. How much of a threat is he going to be with 9 deputies on him? And we still see people throughout the video who are doing knee kicks to somewhere. It looks like the groin. I see an individual who produces a taser as he drives down. I see one supervisor who's pulling people off and holding people back from getting involved. So my whole issue would be the concern is, why are you have 4 deputies who are punching, and then one of the 4 deputies goes into knee strikes, more than likely into the groin. And then you have another deputy who you will see the yellow distinct color of a taser, who's pulling out a taser. So at what point in time did you overcome this intoxicated individual's attack, I would say, or punch, to where it warrants, all these blows? So at some point in time, you have to really de-escalate. You have to recognize the fact that, as a deputy sheriff, you have to recognize the fact that when you apply force, it has to be disciplined, it has to be controlled, and you have to recognize the time in this incident where you've neutralized the attack or the force or resistance being placed on you. So I have a lot of issues with this one, and I'm told, that these individuals involved in this did not receive any form of remedial training or any form of discipline on this. You can't sit here, I can't sit here as a 31-year veteran of the Sheriff's Department, as a captain, and say that every one of those punches were reasonable. I can't sit here, and I don't think anyone else can sit here and say those knee strikes were reasonable. You can't sit here and say producing the taser, and if you drive stun this individual, was that reasonable and necessary to overcome the resistance you were
The reason I played that first is because this next one, from everything you've just said, seems that much more egregious, because this man is in cuffs. Why are you not? I know why it's not doing that. Let's get rid of that and go to this. So, there they are, taking this guy in cuffs, not only in cuffs and bent over the counter, having his head held in place, but it's like, you hate to make fun of somebody in that position, but it looks like they're prepping a slingshot.
I would agree with that assessment. You already have him neutralized, okay? He's handcuffed, his legs are spread, is what I'm seeing. He's bent over the booking desk, which is a normal procedure to neutralize an individual. You have the individual, which we call desk 1, who's filling out the paperwork typically. He's on the right side of the booking desk. He's holding his shoulder blades down onto the booking desk. Right then and there, this individual poses no threat. And I would imagine he wasn't really posing a significant safety issue because he was still handcuffed. He could have kicked him. We don't know what happened before before they laid him on the booking list. But once he's there, that's where the de-escalation needs to start. De-escalation is this. That's where back when I was a young deputy, we had verbal judo. You know, I've done it many times. Okay, I'm not 6 feet tall, but I would bend down and I would whisper in there, "Hey, listen, you're going to get booked in. There's nothing we can do about it. We don't want it. We don't want to get hurt, and we don't want you to get hurt." Right? That's where you start de-escalating. What can I do or what can I say to get you to comply with the booking process so we can get through this? And then you just keep talking. What is bothering you? That's the ideal time to start that de-escalation. Now you see in the video, which is concerning to me as a retired captain, as a manager, is why are we doing this tug of war thing? He's handcuffed, he's neutralized, his legs appear spread, and then you have an individual standing there with stripes on his shoulder, right? Why isn't that supervisor, or there was a corporal or a sergeant directing this? What prompted them to take an individual who you have already secured? And you see the tug of war because the deputy on the right hand is like, no. I mean, I interpret that as no, because he's he's still holding on to that new book, that individual. And the deputies on the opposite side, they basically want to earth slam him into the concrete, which they did. And to me, it looked like he suffered some significant injuries, whether it be, some type of fracture to the face or a concussion. But what was the cause of that to be handcuffed? Now, yes, handcuffed individuals can be dangerous, right? But they're rare and they're far and few between, but you got to be mindful of that. But in this particular case, I would question the fact that what was that need? What was the need? Because you put that person in that position, right? In a position where he cannot really move or react. Eventually, they're going to calm down. I've done this many times when I worked corrections. You're going to prop them back up and say, "Hey, can we get through the process?" Because the process is the process, sir. We're going to get through this process, and we like to do it as quickly and as peaceful as possible,
Well, one of the big problems that I've seen, and I never like to put it in a position where I vilify police officers, because that's a job I wouldn't wish on anybody. And it takes
that's a captain's job, is to evaluate the conduct and make a determination. Well,
but the point I'm getting at is, ever since it kind of started before, but ever since we've gotten into the 21st century,
mm-hmm.
and we've adopted this attitude of, what's correct is wrong and what's wrong is correct. And I always go back to the Eric Garner, quote unquote, murder, which it absolutely was not. And for those of you who don't know what the Eric Garner story was, this was a man in Staten Island who was allegedly selling what they called loosies, which are just loose cigarettes. He had been arrested 41 prior times, and these are all desk appearance tickets. That's all they are. He's not a violent criminal or this, that, or the other. But, and this is just my personal opinion, this is something mama should have taught you, okay? If you raise your hands to a police officer, you're not going to get a lollipop. Okay. Sure. Odds are you're going to get your ass handed to you. And Eric Garner was a big man. He was an immense man. And they put him in a quote unquote chokehold, which they did. The guy looked like a flea on the back of an elephant, but he jumped on Eric Garner, grabbed him in a chokehold to bring him down to the floor. On the floor, if all you have to do is watch the tape and you can see, "I can't breathe, which became the rally cry. And he died. Man died of an asthma attack. There was nobody had their arms around his neck when he died. So, but immediately, the police officers were wrong. They used a wrongful chokehold, which they didn't, because once he was brought down, chokehold was released. The officers were, I think one of them was put in jail and the others were all fired. Family got a $5 million settlement. for breaking the law. So police officers get put into a very, very bad light. But if you are, again, the badge that matters, and you're making these claims, and you're not writing checks with your mouth that you're asking cash, and then you're not only taking steps in your personal line of duty, but when it comes to VEM's situation, rather than admitting, okay, we got bad information, I'm sorry, which people take as a much, much better representation of who you are, because you're saying, okay, I screwed up. That's why pencils have erasers. I made a mistake. Rather than doing that, you almost take a mafia approach to it, and you double down on it. You go to the mattresses, and you're gonna die on that hill, and you are just gonna keep adding lie after lie after lie, which is what both of you are intimating here, to the situation. You're really burying yourself. Now, we've got a situation that we've been dealing with for decades already, where politicians, career politicians especially, have been lying to the public to get their agendas pushed through, to get the things that they want, to advance their careers, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll go back to you here, VEM, because this is really where you kind of got thrown onto the butcher block a little bit. Is this what you see going on? Because as I stated before, we know the media lies. We know the media misrepresents things, because you Google VEM Miller, you Google VEM Miller, third Trump assassin, and the stories come up. Nothing comes up in regard to the fact that there's nothing substantiating any of this. Nothing comes up in the way of retractions. There's nothing coming up to vindicate you, to put a stop to this well over a year ago. That's you. So, I mean, where does this leave you?
It's been tremendously difficult because I keep getting attacked, and his campaign's been weaponized. I have no criminal history, but they've dug up things like my messy divorce, where my ex-wife said a lot of untrue things. And again, for anybody that wants to dig through that, once you dig through that, you'll find that I was actually a great father to my children. But nonetheless, because my ex-wife said things in family court, again, that were untrue, and it's easy to, for anybody to read those cases, it's easy. Like, they couldn't find actual child abuse, so they made my documentary work into child abuse. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but they called me a cyber bully, because once I realized what was going on in this family court, which incidentally involved somebody that I would categorize as a woke judge, that was more vindictive because of my support of Donald Trump and MAGA, that's all she talked about in court. And lo and behold, there's no court records, there's no court recordings, there's no court transcripts, because she made sure there wasn't. So in this very fraudulent court, a lot of things were said about me, but once you look at it, you realize the children actually think I'm a great father, and they made my documentary work in calling out the corruption of family work into quote unquote child abuse, right? Now, how this relates to what you're saying is that there is a complete lack of accountability. That judge, having done what she did, should have been removed. And what's happened since then, which is really interesting, there was 4 judges involved in that criminal transaction. 2 of the main judges that were involved in making my documentary work in journalism into AKA cyberbullying and child abuse, because those are the 2 judges that I went after and exposed. Well, fortunately, I've been able to remove one of those judges, who came down in a big scandal because of the actions I took in exposing her and also in writing up a lawsuit that detailed her indiscretions. I think this comes down to a lack of accountability. You know, Chad Bianco, this judge that I'm referring to, Jasmine Akbarali, all of these individuals, if they're held accountable and they actually, you know, Mark, the things happen that would happen to you and I, you know, which is that we'd be prosecuted. I'd be in jail for a very long time if I had done the same thing and, you know, perjured myself. That doesn't happen to these individuals. They stand behind their title and they're allowed to get away with it over and over again. And guess why this stuff keeps happening? Because they know they could get away with it. So I see it from both the media point of view, because I've been a media professional since the 90s, since the late 90s when I graduated UCLA. And I also see it from the point of view of lack of prosecutions, which in this case, for example, with Chad Bianco, you have a situation where the DA, that's one of the individuals, the DA of Riverside, Michael Hestrin, who's able to hold Chad Bianco accountable, instead goes, it's his fishing buddy. They profess their love to each other. They're like the best of friends. And Hestrin basically has a pattern and practice, a history of ignoring all these issues. Then you have, you know, and Michael Hestrin is a Republican, but then you have the Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta. And when you dig into Rob Bonta, you see that, you know, all these kind of frauds that we know Chad Bianco's doing in terms of the sort of thing where it's like a $3,000 door gets billed at $50,000. And the one deputy with contracting experience who's catching the fraud then, you know, is given highway therapy, is given, you know, is sent to another station, and another deputy is brought in that has no idea about contracting. And then you look at Rob Bonta and you realize, you know, he's doing, and this is in the public realm now, you know, where he started getting accused of, I believe it was something to do with mortgage fraud and buying houses or whatever. Well, these guys are all enriching themselves, and the WWE wrestling match they play in front of us where, oh, I hate Rob Bonta, he's like a leftist guy, and, you know, this back and forth. Well, that doesn't really apply to the real crimes that enrich these individuals. And so there's a lack of accountability, there's a lack of checks and balances, because they've all been allowed to get away with it. And what I say is that these criminals in our positions of power have become the rule and not the exception. And that only happens when people get away with this sort of thing. So the answer is accountability, and it's sad that we have not seen any.
Well, again, this is the point that we're getting to. You know, when you're dealing with, look, the accountability issues that we're dealing here affect other people's lives. It affected your life tremendously. It affected your parents' life tremendously. What's being said, and I wanted to be very, very clear about this in our discussion before and during this, we're not trying to do a hit piece here on Sheriff Chad Bianco, gubernatorial candidate Chad Bianco. We are doing relevant news here of information that happens to be information that nobody's put out. And it's, again, it's that retraction, and it's that humanistic approach of, okay, this got screwed up, mea culpa, sorry, I screwed up. And nobody wants to do that. We know that the media is not going to do it, and evidently he's not doing it, but it's being exacerbated by sticking to it. And that's why I had asked you before, Mike, in regard to, did this appear to be a pattern of behavior in that department with, you know, I'll use your phrase, being the only badge that matters? Because when he states publicly, I'm the only candidate with that kind of integrity nationally, and we can refute that type of quote unquote integrity, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, I would. My experience is the other 4 sheriffs I worked under, they wouldn't have gone to the podium for a misdemeanor arrest. They don't hold press conferences for a misdemeanor arrest. You know, this was the little tease. We arrested someone at the Trump rally with a firearm. That's all you arrest. No, you arrested him 1.2 miles away from the rally location at the parking lot. You know, and so when you look at it, and that's where the rub is, I think, for a lot of people who are both currently employed by the sheriff's department and who have retired. That why is he lying about this? You know, anybody with just a little bit amount of investigative experience would tell you that if they had, you know, VEM had fraudulent documents, you know, they would have been charged with it, right? If VEM made an actual threat under California Penal Code Section 422, making criminal threats, right? They would have charged them. But again, we're doubling down. When you look at integrity, it's doing the right thing. So I'm just going to give you two examples where I think the lack of it, the integrity was not there. The doing the right thing and equal, you know, he's a crime fighter, right? So back in 2021, one of the sergeants, so Sergeant Michael Yarbrough, he observed an individual who was at a local establishment. He observed an individual walk in and join his party at that same local establishment, right? That individual testified in a criminal trial, right? The jury rightfully returned a not guilty verdict, right? That's what juries do. They find you guilty or they find you not guilty. He then approached that individual, attacked that individual, and ultimately was prosecuted for misdemeanor battery under Penal Code Section 242, right? Now, keep in mind,
Sheriff Bianco approached and attacked.
No. This was Sergeant Michael Yarbrough.
Oh, okay.
One of his sergeants, right? And he ultimately negotiated a plea to disturbing the peace, and took his medicine, basically, his year probation, summary probation, and all anger management and stuff like that. So and that's pretty. Would you your sergeant getting arrested or prosecuted? That'd be pretty embarrassing, right? That would be embarrassing, and this is one of the things that Bianco is very proud of, that he fires deputy who embarrassed the department. Right, this individual committed crime. He negotiated plea. He went through the court process, negotiated a very nice plea, because in California, if you are arrested and convicted of battery, you cannot possess a firearm for 10 years. There's a government code for that. DOJ will come knocking at your door. All right. And in this particular case, there was also an emergency protective order issued by the judge where Sergeant Yarbrough was supposed to surrender his firearms, but that never occurred. Don't worry about that. Wink, wink. We don't want to get involved in taking your guns, right? There was an email on that was produced, right? And then, very embarrassing, he was allowed to continue his employment all the way until he got off probation, and then he honorably retired, right? In 2024, Deputy Lexi Harlow was arrested by the Riverside Police Department for felony DUI. She was reportedly placed on an ankle monitor. She had all these conditions. She negotiated what her attorneys negotiated, go through the plea bargain. They negotiated a 17B. So Penal Code Section 17B in California, you reduce a felony to a misdemeanor, right? They reduced it to a misdemeanor. She was sentenced to like 143 days county time, $600 fine, and a whole bunch of, 9 months of AA and a bunch of stuff. She's currently on probation. She's a field training officer. My department sources say she's a field training officer out of the Paris Sheriff Station, and pretty embarrassing. And I go, she didn't get fired or suffer any adverse employment action like discipline. And my department sources say, no, she didn't. She is good friends with Chad Bianco's daughter, who's also a deputy, right? So when you talk about some of the things, we talk about character, you want someone who's going to be honest in character. If you're proudly boasting that you're going to fire people for embarrassing the department, I think it's pretty embarrassing that you get arrested. I think it's pretty embarrassing you negotiate a plea deal. And I'm pretty embarrassing that you're walking around in a Riverside County Sheriff's uniform on probation and you're still working. That's pretty embarrassing, right? In comparison, no to an individual, and I'll give you another example. An individual was on New Year's Eve. He was off duty. He acted stupid, right? You act stupid when you're drinking with all your buddies and the neighbor, a neighbor called. There's more to it. I'm just paraphrasing. I'm scaling it down. Basically, he got a complaint. We know this guy's a deputy. He did this, this, and this, right? No crime was committed, but he was given a letter of intent to terminate for embarrassing the department, conduct unbecoming of a deputy. In comparison, Sergeant Dave Tinker. And I'm not going to shy away from mentioning names, right? I'm going to tell you the truth. I can give you case numbers for all this. I can give you the court printouts for all this.
They're all public record.
Yes, they're all public record. Sergeant Dave Tinker, he's been outed. He's been public that he makes, fans only pornographic videos with his wife, and he makes, 6 figures. There's a rule in the department that if you have outside employment, you have to notify the sheriff, and the sheriff has to approve it or deny it, right? That's a policy. It hasn't changed. He hasn't done either. He's still doing it. Bianco was on another podcast where he said, well, where's the proof on that? Well, the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. We know you had a meeting with him. 2, he posted it on his Facebook accidentally because he had the OnlyFans or fans only Facebook and stuff. He posted on his family and friends Facebook. So of course he took it down, but before he took it down, everybody in the sheriff's department had already, clicked the link, right? But that's pretty embarrassing, would you think? You're not only are you violating policy, but you're embarrassing the department, right? You can't say that we hold our deputies to a higher standard of public trust and public image, and keep the guy employed. These are his standards. These are his standards, but they're disseminated unfairly. For example, Dave Tinker, Lexi Harlow, Michael Yarbrough are Caucasian. Okay, when all things are being equal, the individual who got his letter of intent to terminate because he got drunk on New Year's Eve, he was Hispanic. I know another individual who was Hispanic, right? And I'm not going to mention his name, right? He was dating a girl, right? The girl's ex filed a complaint with the department. Chad disciplined him for embarrassing the department. I go, when all things are being equal, conduct being embarrassing, when you look at it, conduct being embarrassing, why do you fire some and discipline some and not the others? When all things are being equal, it comes down to basically, I used to say, I had a saying throughout my career, and I would tell my bosses, I go, well, that's all white to me. If I do the same thing that my counterpart did, he gets away with it. And this is, my counterpart got away with it. Why did he get away with it and I didn't? We were on the same call for service. Why am I being investigated and he's not?
Well, I find this particularly disturbing because, number one, look, you're a police officer, sheriff's deputy, and you're DUI.
Felony DUI, which is your DUI, you crash and you called injury. Now, the Riverside Police Department arrested her for felony DUI.
So you're talking not just embarrassing the badge, embarrassing the department, but you're talking a felony.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To me, I don't know departmental rules. Sounds like a fireable offense. Doing porn, I do believe, is a federal offense. And proudly displaying that and putting it out there for people not only to know that you're doing it, but that you're bringing in a rather large income from it. Again, that's kind of an embarrassment to the department. It's an embarrassment to the badge, never mind breaking a whole bunch of laws. Getting loud and rowdy on New Year's, why the neighbor didn't go and approach him and say, hey, could you turn it down a little bit? I don't think there would have been an escalation of anything. And yet that gets a letter of reprimand. Things don't make any sense. Now,
Correct.
I've had the sheriff on the show a couple of times. spoken to him. I've had Sheriff Mack on the show a couple of times talking about constitutional sheriffs. Sheriff Bianco claiming to be a constitutional sheriff. And again, sheriffs are elected officials.
Mhm.
So deputies automatically fall under that category.
Right.
The social promotion or a promotion from a politician. This is, you've been elected to the position and you're hiring these other deputies and they fall under the same category. And when you're supposed to be protecting the people and protecting the department and the sanctity and truth behind the badge and everything else, you can't be representing one way and playing, as politicians have done forever now, you know, rules for me, rules for thee and not for me.
Yeah.
Can't quite go and play that game. And this seems to be kind of a pattern of loosey-goosey behavior. Now, I will absolutely offer the sheriff an opportunity to respond, because that's only being fair and unbiased.
Fair. Absolutely. Absolutely.
But from everything that you guys are saying, you up close and personal, having been in the department, and UVEM being a victim of judicial overreach, to say the least, where do you really see this going? A, for yourself, and B, for sheriff, now gubernatorial candidate Chad Bianco? Let's start with you, then.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I don't see it going anywhere in terms of Chad Bianco being held accountable. I do have a lawsuit which will take years and years to even get to court, because he's using the taxpayer trust to essentially fund every delay tactic, from what I understand. You know, I'm with a mom and pop firm, great attorney named Ethan Behrman, whereas they got a huge firm, I think 6 or 7 lawyers working on it. I've heard they charge, you know, upwards of $1,000 an hour. They probably burned through $250,000 up to this point, if I was to guesstimate. That's certainly what I was told by various attorneys in terms of how this goes. So they're going to drain the public trust. He uses it as his ATM. They're going to delay it as much as possible. I think eventually I will be victorious. The sad part of this is my parents are old. They're heavily traumatized by this. This affects my life on a daily basis because I'm very careful about my movements. I know that Chad Bianco operates like a gangster. I don't want to be caught in the wrong place, wrong time. And, you know, being an investigative journalist, having the viewpoint. I mean, I worked as a music video director as one of the biggest gangster rap directors of 2000 to 2008. You know, I've hung out with Crips and Bloods, and we used to bring the Nation of Islam to help us oversee shoots because, frankly, the street guys are scared of the Nation of Islam. You know, so I have a very colorful past, and I know how some of this stuff works. You know, it's not within the realm of impossibility that Chad Bianco would employ one of these guys to cause me harm. So I have to constantly watch my back. I have to be careful of what I do. My life's dramatically changed. And frankly, Mark, the thing that's been very disappointing, you know, I've been involved in this MAGA movement for a very long time. I've certainly paid a heavy price in family court and with this situation that happened, because this situation wouldn't have happened if I didn't get whistleblowers calling me about, you know, truckloads of ballots being transported over state lines. This simply would not have happened. That's the reason I put my guns in my trunk. That's the reason I was even in California and then found out about the Coachella Trump rally. So that has certainly soured me in terms of this two-party politics. You know, I'm still a fan of President Trump, I would say, and I think he was certainly the better choice in 2024 versus Kamala. That I will stick by. I don't think that's going to change. In terms of me being in the Republican Party, about 2 weeks ago, I actually became became an independent again. And it's hard for me to be part of a group that has been weaponized against me, especially the California Republican Party, but that has been so cruel, like posting my divorce because they can't find criminal stuff, and using allegations from that divorce, that if you actually read that document, it's clear that this was a whole bunch of nonsense, and the laws and citations that they used is a whole bunch of nonsense. But being in that party, being constantly attacked, I couldn't stomach it anymore. And the thing that's also been quite heart-wrenching is I know a lot of these quote-unquote influencers, investigative journalists, and you're one of the few that has actually had the courage to have me on the show. I mean, I know my Rolodex is pretty much 80% of the influencers and investigative journalists. And when I text those people and I say, hey, like, you know, Chad Bianco's a bad dude, get me on the show. I'll bring other individuals, because I'm friendly with now a lot of Riverside former and current Sheriff's Department employees who have the receipts. Well, there's been a complete blackout on the story, almost complete blackout. People try to ignore it. When I text them and I say, hey, how's it going? You know, are you going to go check out this latest movie? They're very responsive. But I bring up Chad Bianco, and they don't want to talk about it. And this it started very early on when Laura Ingraham invited me onto her show to tell my side of the story. I believe the legal department made her change her mind, and so Fox News doesn't talk about it. And now when you go into the receipts of what's happening with Fox News, well, the California Republican Party has bought tens of millions of dollars worth of airtime, which from my point of view, and I would think potentially from your point of view, this is where journalism has become propaganda, where money dictates what happens and the truth that gets out there, while the little guy gets squashed, you know? So I could no longer associate myself with any of these gangs. This is no different than the Crips and Bloods that I used to go do music videos for, where not based upon truth, but based upon gang affiliation, they decide to do certain things, squash certain stories. And this is ultimately very dangerous for this country, because if we can't get out of that blue and red paradigm, what happens is, we're going to end up in civil strife, like another thing that, comes to mind is the shooting that happened in Minnesota, right? I look at that footage and I'm like, all right, a dude just got shot in the back. They're going out there saying that this guy was an attempted assassin. I mean, that really hits home for me, because that's what I got called. Obviously, I wasn't, my gun didn't drop out of my pocket. None of that stuff happened. I was the one that, out of my own self-sovereignty, told him, hey, this is, I have a couple of firearms, offered them to hold on to him. And that's recorded. That's a fact, right? But the way they're twisting the story, and the way at the top level, Christy Nome goes out there, and Stephen Miller goes on out there, and both individuals, by the way, that I know, I've talked to Stephen Miller. I mean, I've been inside privileged rooms and hung out with these individuals, including President Trump. And the fact that, these kind of lies are propagated and to create division is, I just can't stomach it anymore, frankly, and I can't be a part of that. I've started a new platform called the Demtarian platform, which is all about uniting red and blue, getting rid of these party affiliations, and and I often try to turn lemon into lemonade, which is kind of what situation I've been I've been forced into. But I think it's all ultimately for the better, because we need ideas out there that are more unifying, based upon law and more principle, as opposed to gang affiliations, which is what I see right now.
Well, before we turn this over to Mike, two things. Number one, just quickly explain to people, when you say that he's using the public trust to defend himself, exactly what that means.
Well, he's violating the public trust, in my opinion. Okay, because this is what happens is when Chad goes out on his campaign or he speaks, he always says, I have 32 years of law enforcement. I have the most integrity and most honest individual on the campaign, right?
Well, no, excuse me, Mike, for a second, because what I was talking about was what Vem had just said in regard to his defense fund.
Oh, his legal defense fund.
Out of
Okay.
public trust.
Yeah, my understanding is I'm being told that that the county has, and this is what I'm just being told by people who are in the department. At some point in time, the county cannot absorb every one of these lawsuits, right? I always say one thing Chad Bianco is going to be known for is lies and lawsuits. There are up to 60 lawsuits that are going through between employees who were their labor rights were violated, to the families who were lied to about loved ones who died in custody, to use of forces, right? So you had this individual who filed a lawsuit against Chad, the individual, for campaigning in uniform in violation of government code. I think it's 3206. So government code 3300 that section is called the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, right? So it tells you what you can and can't do. I think it's 3206, 3302 or 3306. You can look it up, right? There's a section there that say, no employee or no officer or employee, basically a peace officer, can campaign in uniform, right? Because law enforcement is supposed to be, nonpartisan. We're supposed to exercise our duties and responsibility in a fair, objective manner. So my understanding is that the county has kind of drawn a line and says, hey, this is a campaign related. This isn't law enforcement or county related. You got to defend yourself on this lawsuit, which I thought was a very brilliant lawsuit to come, because according to Chad, he says that law doesn't apply to him. Well, that law doesn't apply to him, that he got a letter stating that law doesn't apply to him, that he spoke to investigators and they said that law didn't apply to him. He said he spoke to federal investigators and they said that law didn't apply to him. Now, if you read Government Code 3300, I don't remember reviewing anything in the statute that said the elected sheriff is exempt from this statutory law. This is codified. This is written law. So say that's true. Say, for example, someone came up with some brilliant legal analysis that say elected officials are exempt from the law, right? But you think as the sheriff, you should respect the law because if your employees have to follow it, maybe you should follow it. I'm just saying. So a couple things come to mind. If you got a letter saying that you're exempt from this law, why don't you produce the letter? And let's get this over with, right? Produce the letter, because I believe he said that in his debate, or his little debate with Superintendent Thurman, I think it is, California State School Superintendent, on Fox 11 when they debated about it. He also said on that particular debate that he can't lie. I can't lie. The law prohibits me from lying. Well, what statute says that peace officers are legally, have to legally tell the truth? So I'm like, well, okay, the law says that. Where's the law? Where is the law in the penal code? Is it in the vehicle code section? Is it in the business and professional code section? Is it in the civil code? Is it in the government code? Is it a health and safety code? I don't know. I can't find it. Where's the law that says law enforcement officers have to tell the truth, right? Well, the Supreme Court has said that peace officers can lie, during an investigation, right? It's called a ruse, and I've used that many times, and especially when I testified. You lied to my client. Yes, I created a ruse in my request for the truth, but that's in a criminal investigation. But not in your every day you go out and tell everybody I'm honest. I fire people for embarrassing the department. I have the most integrity. Who are you trying to convince? From my perspective, are you trying to convince the people, or are you trying to convince yourself? Right? So yeah, I think he is violating the public trust. I think he's using his position as the sheriff with 32 years of employment with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department as just my mere employment. You should trust me, which I disagree, right? Because we see the double standards, both internally and externally. You'll see the double standards, and what's sad. What's really sad and unfortunate is you see a lot of the people within the organization who are leaking these videos out because they're seeing no corrective measures, right? These deputies who, you know, we showed here on these videos are probably good deputies. They probably just fell off the track that particular day, right? And they need remedial training. So me as a commander, I routinely would bring deputies in and say, hey, this is what happened. This is what I'm being told. Let me tell your side of the story. Tell me why you did A, B, C, D. And I'm going to tell you whether you did a good job, or I'm going to tell you what we need to do to correct it, right? So that's, you know, as a commander, I've done that repeatedly. You know, deputies, error in judgment, good deputies. We don't want to fire a deputy. We put a lot of resources, time, money, and training into deputies. We want them to do the right thing and serve the community and safeguard the constitutional rights of everyone they come in contact with. Everyone they come in contact with. We don't want to take them behind the woodshed and beat the shit out of them. We just don't want to, we don't do that, right? We're not in Jim Crow era anymore. This is 2026. You know, the society has changed, technology has changed, our philosophy has changed. Because remember, law enforcement used to be very secretive. You just do what I tell you and call it a day. Now we question, well, why do I need to do that, right? And I don't have a problem with it. You know, I don't have a problem with it.
Well, people also, you know, attitudes have changed, and that's a big issue there, because one of the things that we're dealing with is, like you were just talking about, with doing a ruse or this or that or the other. But facts being what they are, when it comes to that fine line of the truth, when you get called in to testify in court, you're swearing to tell the truth. When you take your oath of office, you're swearing to tell the truth. When you stand up at that podium in front of the cameras, anything goes. And unfortunately, this is the situation that not only have governmental officials and public trust officials, which police officers are, have grossly taken advantage of. And you put something out there, and as I've explained to my audience ad nauseum at this point, when they sit and accuse and go with the information that's been put out there about the media, that, you know, we get our marching orders from the CIA and the 4 a.m. meetings, which is, well, that's just a crock, really. But the fact being what it is, when these governmental officials put out their interpretations, especially with police departments, every police department nowadays has a PIA, a PIO.
PIO, yeah.
You got your public information officer, and he is the propagandist, basically. He is the person who puts out what that department's information agenda is going to be, what their spin on the story is going to be. Now, journalism is supposedly gathering the facts, delivering them to the people, not opinions. So it's unfortunate that when a lot of these officials get up in front of that microphone, they're not necessarily telling the truth. They're telling their spin. And the people tend to believe it because, you know, either they're the news anchor and they've got the, you know, the suit and tie, and they're sitting there nice and pretty in front of the camera, or they're wearing a badge, or they've got, you know, their flag pin on because they're, you know, federal officials, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't mean anything. It's got to be a matter of the truth or not the truth. And we have a lot of misrepresentation being put out there by everybody. So we have to go and get to the bottoms of these things. And that's why it's important to reveal what both of you had to say in regard to not only the situations, but in regard to Sheriff/candidate Bianco's modus operandi, and then to have him on and see exactly what his reply to it is, because this really does strike home to the root of the problem when you were talking before about, starting a new party that combines everything. All of the adjectives that we have in the English language and all of the division that's been sown by the political parties, by the different religious groups, and especially by the media propagating it, these are the issues that are keeping us from what's important. I've said it on the air a billion times. I'll continue to say it. We are the CEOs, CFOs, COOs of this corporation called the United States of America. Because we have been absentee landlords, we have allowed our employees to bankrupt our business. And we have to take hold and not fall into the rhetoric that's put out there and the character assassination that is part and parcel of what politicians.
Right.
And now you have to classify him no longer as sheriff, but politician, Bianco. The propaganda that they will put out there to boost themselves. And these are the things that have to be exposed to the public.
Right. He is a politician. Character does matter. And I will tell you, I will take a playbook out of his a few of his statements was do your research into these. He has focused on some judges, corrupt judges, if they don't sentence people the way we want them sentenced. Well, there's sentencing guidelines and there's rules and laws, and every statute, penal code statute has a corresponding exposure. They have a low term, a midterm, and an upper term exposure into incarceration, right? They just follow the law. You don't like it, then your legislators can change it, right? And for them, when he says he has a long road to travel in his lawsuit, that's going to be very true, because the county, they contract out, their county council contracts out, and what they're going to continue, and they're going to have this meaningful mediation, and then the county is going to back out. All right, you're going to go to court, and they're going to have a continuance. They're going to have another round of meaningful mediation, and then just before you get a trial date, they're going to ask the judge to continue again for more meaningful mediation. So this is a tactic. This is a road that you're going to travel down, and they're going to make some low ball offers. So I can say this in good conscience that I too was almost millered. I was a captain, and I can tell you a story about an off-duty employee who got in an accident, wasn't drunk, but other people didn't like the employee. And they called sheriff's administration and said, this employee was drunk, right? After reports were written and investigation was done, he came after me and had me investigated. From what I understand was for covering up an employee, off-duty employee who was DUI. Well, fortunate enough for me, at 10 o'clock at night when I get the call that there was an off-duty, it's off-duty, right? It's the individual's POV. I get a call that this employee got in an accident. And so two things come to mind. One, is he okay? And two, is he drunk? So yes, he's okay. No, he's not drunk. Write a report, right? And at this point in time, there was rumors floating around that I was going to run for sheriff, which I had no intention on running for sheriff. So what he did was he came down and, 2 weeks before my retirement date, he placed me on administrative leave, and then told I was getting calls from dispatch, from everybody, that I covered up a DUI. So he's going to come back to you on that I covered up a DUI. And there's 2 investigations into that DUI, right? And the 4 deputies, the sergeant, the corporal, and the 2 deputies, the 2 motorists, and the 2 pedestrians who were all on scene at the time of the collision said that he wasn't drunk. And they even wrote a report about it. And so I know when you mentioned my name, that's going to be Chad's response. So I just wanted to arm you with that information. And if you want, before the case number for that is L, the report number is L as in Lincoln, 203260124 is the report number, where the corporal, who is a certified drug recognition expert, had determined that the employee was not drunk, right? So, and there's nothing you can do at 10 o'clock at night when you have a DRE, a sergeant, 2 deputies, 2 motorists, and 2 pedestrians saying that the driver, solo occupant of the vehicle, was not intoxicated. He was texting while driving. If you think he was texting his wife, "I'm on my way home," and hit the curb and hit a lamppost. Right. He's lucky to be alive because it was her car. You know.
Yeah, he has a higher power to answer to.
Yeah, you got a higher power. So I've been dealing with that lately, and I've had meetings with people and say, "Hey, here's the report numbers. You know, here's the case numbers. It's written in the report. It's signed off in the day of the incident." And so this whole, you know, you talked about you don't want a hit job or sling. Everything I've stated here was based on my training and experience. I don't believe in firing deputies who err in judgment when we can correct that. You know, there are exceptions to the rule, you know, like getting arrested. Can't have you working while you're on probation. You know, I think that getting arrested, for me personally, as a commander, that kind of draws the line. You shouldn't be getting arrested, right? Doing the porn, you know, I remember seeing a podcast where Bianco said, "Oh, well, that's his wife's account." Okay, well, he's still doing it. And if your position is you're embarrassed, anything you do and you terminate employees for embarrassing the department, then that could deem embarrassing. These are your standards. I want to meet your standards. I want to adhere to your standards, Chad. You know, so that's a couple of things where he'll come and I've seen in podcasts, because I've talked to many people. As soon as VEM put his number out on the board of supervisors, I think you got my number from some people, and then that's how we connected. Because I won't shy away from the truth. I will tell you what I think. I will tell you when I'm wrong. I can tell you when, oh, that was stupid of me. I'll also tell you that, you know, this is what I think. This is the law. And I've done that. I actually ran, you know, in the 12th hour in the last campaign after a lot of urging from people. And then I spoke to, you know, everybody, you know, and some of them didn't like my answer. I go, if you don't like my answer, then change the law with the state legislature. Because we follow the law without passion or prejudice, you know, without bias. We're going to follow the law. We're not going to go one way or another. We're going to be partisan. We're not going to be partisan here. We're going to be objective. We apply the law equally. And it's sad that the Riverside County Sheriff's Department has a partisan sheriff that doesn't even sit down at the table with the, you know, with the community groups, the ACLU, you know. I sat down with Black Lives Matter protesters. We sat down. Oddly enough, we had a private room at a Mexican restaurant, and over, you know, chips, salsa, burritos, and enchiladas, we planned out, how do you want to do your protest? You know, we talked about it. After the protest, we all went back to the station, and, you know, they got to sit in a police car. They got their kids to sit in a police car. They got to take pictures, you know. And from my perspective, and I commanded the Lake Elsinore station, and I also was a lieutenant at Harupa, you know, we had no tension or racial issues because as the leader of a department or leader of a station, you set the tone. You know, the tone is, you know, you serve the community. Your personal biases or needs have no place when you're on duty.
Well, now that you brought that up, I wasn't going to broach it because it's technically not that important. And I already expressed my point of view on it. But taking all bias out of this, taking all political and personal bias out of this, I'm going to play this clip, and then let's talk about, as a police officer, strictly as a police officer, in a situation whereby you've got 10,000 or better protesters in a heated position and X amount of peace officers, was it the right thing to do or not? So let's just play.
Listen to somebody commanding the crowd, saying, give them space to take the knee. Look at the officer. They're even recording this moment.
You know, the unfortunate part of this is everybody. This is a huge divide. There's no working here, voices be heard. It's just a big, huge divide. And the leaders of this have to work with us to make a difference. And if this is what starts it, then this is what starts it.
You're working with them right now by taking a knee.
100%. 100%.
working with them right now by taking a knee and showing your
100%. 100%.
What is your message to the community?
The message to the community is this does nothing. This does nothing. Your voices mean everything. Actions do not. Actions are contrary to what our voices say sometimes.
Okay.
That particular, if you listen to what he's saying, he's frustrated. He has no clue what he's saying, right? He's the whole kneeling part. I don't have an issue with. If you're going to kneel in solidarity with the protesters, I have no issues. But if you listen to what he's saying, right, it does mean a lot. It means a lot to both sides because he's a very partisan sheriff. The issue I have with this, Mark, is that he repeatedly lies about it. He's very dishonest about it. So did you see anyone, I didn't hear anything about a prayer. I haven't seen any video where everyone bowed their head and said a prayer, right? He said he was there basically to work with them, which was good. That's good. That's good for a peace officer. You want to work with the community, right? He said he was there to let them hear their voices where their voices were heard, right? You were there, you participated in that. The issue I have with it is the fact that after this incident, he lied about it. At what point in time did he come up and that, oh no, we were kneeling to pray? He could have said he could have said that we were kneeling in solidarity to keep the peace, because that's first and foremost is the preservation of life and keep the peace, right? We want to be part of the protest, make it a safe protest, right? We want to respond to any instances of vandalism or theft, right? And there was some, not a whole lot, but there was some. The issue is the character about lying about this afterwards. To me, okay, you kneeled with a member with a particular group in our society. Okay, you kneeled in solidarity because you said it. You kneeled because you wanted to participate in helping them get their voices heard. Their voices were heard, right? What is wrong with that, right? He turned this nothing burger, per se, in my opinion, into this huge national or global criticism of himself because he lied about it. Produce a video where you prayed, because your whole concept was we kneeled for prayer. That is why you kneeled. But when you're kneeling and the Fox 11 reporter is interviewing you, you're not kneeling. You're not saying we're kneeling in prayer. I want to kneel in solidarity with them. I want to kneel to help them get their voices heard, okay? And their voices have been heard. Mark, I don't see anything wrong with that. I personally wouldn't have did it. I was asked to kneel when they did the protest at the lake, out of the Lake Elsinore station. I said, we're not kneeling. We will bow our heads and pray with you, right? We have no issues with that. When I go to the temple, I take my boots off. When I go to the monk temple, I took my boots off. When I went to the mosque in Harupa, I took my shoes off. What do I got to do? So I am aware of what your religious procedures are. They actually provided me a chair to sit and pray with them because they're on their knees, and they just had me do it with the other elders who can't get on their knees and bow and rise and bow. I'm respectful of your religion. I had an opportunity to do all these things, as the coordinator of the Cops for Clergy out of the Harupa Valley Station, which was very enlightening, right? My personal religion or my biases or beliefs will not be bestowed on or forced upon anyone else. If whatever religion you are, I respect that. I would be happy to learn about your religion. I would be happy to be exposed to your religion, right? And I tell the truth about what I do and why I do it. This is the problem, right? And I don't see, if you're doing this in service of the public, fine, but don't lie about it, because that's where for me is where the rub is you keep lying about it, and I would imagine, now that I've said this, because I've been saying this, privately for years, now that I'd said this, let's take a look and see if that response changes in the future. Okay. You never saw it in the beginning. It only when it kind of kept coming up that now we've kind of gone on this, Christian and, my God is bigger than your God, use profanity in the house of God, I guess, which really irritated me because I was there on the January 10th crosstalk, so yeah, that's my take on it. I think if there are certain things we do to be part of the community, and it's very, it's like a diversified portfolio. When you go to a mass, you act differently. When you go to a Baptist church, you're clapping, you're singing loudly, you're celebrating the Lord. When you go to, when you go to a Sikh facility, it's much different. When you go to a mosque, there's a mosque in Harupa Valley, wonderful people there. The food was incredible. And then, how they teach you how they pray and what they pray for, me as a lieutenant and a captain, I enjoyed doing all that stuff and learning about all the different religions. As to your comment on the news, I can tell you the only thing I take the news for, a grain of salt, but the only thing I think that's really accurate in the news these days is the weather. And that could be, they could say it's going to be sunny and then you get rain, but we know that.
I will tell you the line that I used for decades. And that's that if we don't scare the crap out of you, you don't watch.
Yeah.
That's why
negative
is so important.
Yeah. I had one person would text me, said, another retiree said, this is a guy with lots of years of experience, and said, Chad's all hat and no rodeo because people think that we're from Texas now, we've lost our traditions and in the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, the tradition of, a formal chain of command, a tradition of treating our employees fairly, both when it's come times to apply a discipline and corrective measures, to remedial training, to dishing out assignments, that's just my opinion on that matter. I'm glad you asked that question though. I don't have issues with kneeling. I have issues with the false and lying about it. It never happened. And I know we wordsmith this thing. It never happened. But you as a reporter, me as a manager, and I have to review, not only write homicide, 10 years I worked homicide and review cases. I wordsmith the reports. Each word has a meaning. So I never knelt to BLM. I never knelt for BLM. That, to me, that's not the, we can wordsmith that and understand that, but the general public, all they see is you kneeling and people yelling, kneel, popo, kneel, popo, kneel, popo. Why you knelt is what's important. And I think at that particular moment when that reporter was asking, that was a true statement. But you can't come back weeks, months, and years later and say, oh no, I only knelt to pray to my God.
Well, this is the biggest thing that I don't understand about politicians is, hello folks, we've had video for years and now you've got the internet and it lives forever.
It lives. Yeah.
It's
you just own it.
Exactly. Well, we're already past 2 hours. I don't want to push you guys much more. So let's just get to final comments from both of you.
Yeah, there was a few things I just wanted to mention as well. So you had mentioned Sheriff Mack. So the constitutional sheriffs have already condemned Chad Bianco because of the events that happened to me. There was a statement and an episode about that that's publicly available. Also, I want to clarify, when I said public trust, it had dual meaning. Trust in the traditional sense, but also in the legal sense. When I'm saying he's robbing the public trust, California, the country, is run on a trust system, and that is what he's robbing. Also, in terms of the racial aspect to this, because to most people I look white, but my passports clearly say my full name is VEM MILLER Yanovkian, which is an Armenian name. And I think If I was to guess, I think that had something to do with it, this foreign sounding name, Yenovkian, which I haven't used since 2020 when I ran for office and my campaign manager said, hey, drop the Yenovkian. It's too complicated. Make it VEM Miller. And the last thing I wanted to say is, really in terms of political candidates in general, there's this gentleman, Louis Herms, who I've gotten to know, and he's got a similar background as I do in terms of investigative journalism and having the courage to stand up to this nonsense. And I think this new generation of political candidates that's necessary can't be the manicured politician that has no skills. Like somebody like a Louis Herms that knows how to investigate, because I don't think it's about walking up to these people that are never going to do what's in our interest, we the people's interest, and thinking that you just put a different person in there and all of a sudden they're going to change their point of view and willing to negotiate. I think it's more about this Nick Shirley attitude, this James O'Keefe approach where, here's the stuff we've investigated, Mr. Politician, and you've stolen a lot of money from the public trust, right? And this is why I think a politician like a Louis Herms that's able to do this and has taken many proverbial bullets for having done so is the kind of person we have to look to lead us or to serve the public would be the better way to put it, as opposed to these kind of nuisance that I don't think have experienced a day of pain in their life. We need people in there that have been victims to this corrupt system that go in there with a little bit of fire in their belly and they do the right thing. So that's my closing statements, and my social media is already on the screen if anybody wants to follow me.
Excellent.
Well, Mark, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure meeting you and having me on the podcast. I would say, take a playbook, but, Chad Bianco says, do your research. As a law enforcement professional and him as a law enforcement leader, I think it's, if you look at the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice, what they do is they compile all the stats from the departments throughout the state and the county, and they evaluate those statistics that were submitted. Sheriff Bianco has boasted that there's no issue. I think he said in one debate or one Q&A up in Sacramento that Riverside County doesn't have a crime issue. Well, do your research. Over the last 6 years, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department averaged 9.2% Part 1 crimes solve rate. 9.2%, right? The lowest of all 58 counties. Of course, we don't have a crime issue because we're focusing not on solving crime, but trying to advance, the sheriff's political career. That's just my opinion. But the statistics that were reported to the state and their evaluation is true and accurate. And you can't spin that any other way than that we are last. The Riverside County is dead last in solving crime. And that's sad and that's unfortunate. We need to do better, as a department, and that the department does what the leader like Sheriff's Department and his executive staff do. So I think that do your research. When he says do your research. I don't believe in attacking judges for doing their job, because one, they're way smarter than me, right? If I disagree with some of their rulings, but they have a bail schedule and a laws to adhere to as well. But I think do your research, know the character of your candidates, whether they're red or blue, what they did and what they stand for. So, and if someone keeps telling you they have the most integrity, honesty, and they're arguably the best, most respected, you might want to look into that, because I still have contacts with law enforcement executives within the county and managers and, lieutenant and above within the county. And they have something else to say. They have a differing opinion behind closed doors, so do your research. Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure meeting you. And if you ever need me on again, just let me know.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you both for this, because these are discussions that need to be had. Okay. This is when people hear me talk all the time about journalistic integrity, this is what it's about, because people they put out what's popular and they don't put out what's so.
Yeah. Who I liked as a kid was Walter Cronkite.
You always, no matter how you look at it, there's always two sides to every story. and you got to hear them both. So it's important. I hope that people get a lot out of this and they understand, that that you're not a retired captain with an axe to grind, and that VEM's not a terrorist looking to assassinate the president. That there's a lot that's out there and it needed to be gotten out. So I appreciate both of you joining us. I appreciate all the candor that you had. I want to thank, as I always do, because without them, we would not be here. I want to thank Claudia, Kat, Kerry, and Doug, absolute best mods and producers, everything else in the business. Without them, we'd just be three people sitting here having a conversation, maybe a couple of beers. But very, very important. Also, because this is a special respect, normally we're on Sunday night at 8. I will be back this Sunday since I've been off for 6 weeks and giving you replays, I guess I have to get back to work. We'll be back with another very, very, very important child trafficking show on Sunday. I'm not going to reveal the guests. I'm not going to reveal some of the special surprise that's coming along with it, but I suggest you tune in. It's going to be a great show. So once again, VEM, Mike, thank you very, very much. Everybody out there, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Stay well. Thanks again. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.